17th July. Man can get used to anything, even the worst. I've no doubts about that. People have been seen living near a decomposing corpse. The garden is a corpse in its own way, one that I've grown used to. I've grown used to the cat, another corpse, although its appearances never fail to unnerve me. It's part of a landscape to which it's well suited and to which it seems to belong. My lord's mouth sounds a fanfare at the sight of it, but that's all. Cat and dog maintain their positions. Tetanus appears to take no interest in me. Its scorn for my dog and me must be boundless. It doesn't see me and doesn't want to see me. It examines the upper floor often and at length. By contrast, I never tire of studying this pellagra-ridden beast which is, so to speak, stitched into a gummy skin, with nothing on its spine but a crest of bristling hairs. It inspires horror as much through its expression of cruelty as through its look of animal rot. The horror bound to be felt by anyone venturing into a jungle where beasts surviving from prehistory roam at large. This cat looks venomous to me. It possesses a death's head in model form, earless, its cranium as though flayed, its fangs bare of lips. And doesn't it look like something that's just been disinterred and retains the colour of the soil? I thought of killing it, though I don't feel capable of shooting a beast, even a dangerous one. But I'm sure that this cat wouldn't die in any ordinary way, and better to live in wary accord with this monster that I can only know from its outward appearance. To tell the truth, I prefer not to speculate on what dwells beneath that skin. An excerpt there from Michel de Ghelderode's book Spells, from the short story within which called The Sick Garden, which along with the first three stories in the book, The Public Scribe, The Devil in London, and The Sick Garden, are my three favourites from the text. I will say before I begin, I was very kindly sent this for free by Wakefield Press, who are one of my favourite sort of current publishers, so I was very happy to receive this, along with another book which I will, in due time, review. But Spells by Michel de Ghelderode was published by Wakefield in 2017, and the stories within it have a strange... They're a mixture of, you could say, biography and cultural biography, because they're written between 1919 and 1939, so they have this taint and feeling of the war and of the great abortion that was the Great War in the background, whilst also being filled to the brim with strange literary ephemera and symbols and icons, in a way. So they're a strange mixture. And I believe it was originally published in 1941, though Ghelderode is not well known at all, really, in the English, for English readers and English speakers. So a little bit of biography, and then we'll dive into what is perhaps the most uncanny, and I use that word specifically, what is the most uncanny collection of short stories and literature possibly that I've ever read. Extremely unnerving. Ghelderode, 1898 to 1962, avant-garde Belgian dramatist. He's primarily known as a dramatist, playwright. Wrote in French, dealing with typically French themes that you might find in writers such as Antonin Artaud, I think I pronounced that correctly, and Georges Bataille. These extremes, things such as being unnerved, uncanniness, strangeness, ethereality, mystery, but not left at a level that could be in any sense called normal, or anything that is given in that way, the notion of uncanniness and unease, is really taken to the nth degree. a writing of extremes, a writing where things are taken to such extremes that they break, often through humor, through a sort of somewhat meta-prodding at the oh-so-sincere exaltation of the symbol, but writing it that at the same time is oozing with a decaying vitality, which sounds like an oxymoron, but a vitality, a vital nature, an energy that is at one and the same time sort of necro-vital, right? So that it has a focus, that it is completely alive, but it's rotting, it's decaying. Something is always not right. And so when you think of someone such as Bataille going to those religious extremes, pushing himself through to a transcendent that really does eventually sort of become to be understood as the transcendent that is immanent, the transcendence of something like rot or decay. I think this is what we're finding in spells. And the name is somewhat apt regarding the collection itself. Each tale, each story has a relationship with what it would be to, for the all-encompassing nature of a spell, what it is to cast a spell, what a spell retains within the world, what a spell even is altogether. So each story has a relationship there, but is always placing the action that is unfolding within somewhat of a setting that is retained throughout. And the setting is more of an atmosphere, it's more of a feeling with at least some physical things to point to sort of get you placed, but at the same time always unease, as if you, the reader, and the protagonist are really not a priority within the worlds that you are given. And so there isn't a second and that goes by really, and Ghelderode is a master here of within a paragraph making you feel not in control, not as if you really are as if you are being pulled along by some other agency, but at the same time balancing that very skillfully by not allowing it to fall into complete horror, not even terror. There's no fright, there's no scare, but there is something in the atmosphere that is so palpably unnerving, but at the same time intriguing enough that you want to venture. And Ghelderode is dealing in this text, but as what I can find from the small amount of biographical information in English, he's always dealing with a double, two sides, there's always two sides to something, or symbols that allow for that relationship of there is something behind. So puppets with the strings, something's being pulled, masks behind the mask, with a relationship, once again, Artaud and Bataille, to this notion of the conscious and the unconscious, of something bursting through that really you have no control of. But he's also dealing with that sort of flip side of things with what we might call almost rustic, folklore-like symbols. So we can speak of the devil, but there's like the devil of the folklore, a religiosity of a deep rural, sort of rural, mysterious location, often unnamed, that gives you a feeling of an almost like a Celtic left behind religiosity, with those sort of strange, arguably pagan elements coming through. And at the same time, this is also being bolstered by the once again, the combination of the fantastical and the macabre, the grotesque, the rotting and the decaying, and the beauty of a symbol that has been left to itself, to its own devices somewhere. We see this in The Sick Garden, which I think if I had to pick one story, this would be my favourite of the collection. The Sick Garden, where I think really to describe it, I would say that it begins actually with a fairly universal experience for anyone who's lived in a rural location, or a mixture of urban rural location, of that experience, often when you're a child, of seeing the grand decaying manor, or whatever the equivalent might have been in one's own location, which usually is gated, and you can sort of see vines, and things are falling apart, and the paint is flicking off the wall. And as a child, one wonders what mysteries lie within. And we see this in the sick garden, where a man who's fairly lonely and on his own, him and his dog take up residence in this decrepit, decaying mansion, which is scheduled for demolition, and get to know the residents, which is an old woman, a sickly child, a cat, which this comes up in the reading there, and a strange sort of demon creature called tetanus, as in the illness tetanus that you get from rust. And he takes up residence here for rather practical reasons. And what Ghelderode manages to do, and he manages to do this in all the stories, though most of them don't really come to any conclusive end. The atmosphere is just allowed to broil, and then you're left with a sense of unease. But what Ghelderode always does, I think, in beginning his stories, is to take this familiar symbol, and this is why I picked the sick garden to begin with. Take a symbol which is familiar and allow us to enter into the mystery we've always wanted to enter into, and then usurps and negates what we expected in a way that isn't simply cheap. Okay, he's in the house, but actually there wasn't that much there at all, and the garden is overgrowing, and this just isn't a nice... It's just something that isn't right, that we didn't expect, that allows us to retain the mystery, but also doesn't really give us what we want. And so there is sort of maybe even a guilt, a shame on behalf of the world unto which these symbols have been left to die. And we're now going to see them again, but they really aren't. Something has happened in between. But at the same time, there is a humour, I think, to Ghelderode. And I'll give you a reading from probably the second favourite story here. The Devil in London. Now, The Devil in London is about a tourist in London who is so unfathomably bored simply because he's in London, a city that he seems to loathe because of a loathing that comes from a almost Bataille boredom of just insanely bored. And he's wishing to escape this boredom with a sort of fury, and he gets this wish resolved when he comes across the residence of the devil. And the devil is living as a retired magician. This is from The Devil in London. The stage curtain lifted silently, revealing the cube of a stage set, the rear of which was closed by black cloths covered with silver designs, comets, arabesques, shin bones, and funeral tears. Whatever was needed to enthrall children and their nursemaids. My breath stopped in my mouth. Without a puff of smoke or the roll of a drum, the devil had just leaped onto the stage, supple, silent, and as discreet as a cat. Hopla! He was dressed all in scarlet from the tip of his toes to the cock feather in his cap. Scarlet his body stocking, clinging to a bony torso. Scarlet the tights wound round his thighs and scrawny calves. Scarlet his lordly cloak. Scarlet his gloves. He rose to his full height and swayed in the manner of a ruby-red flame or a poppy on its stalk. I saw that for make-up he wore a musketeer-style moustache and goatee beard, and two crystalline pupils glowed in his thin, flower-white face, two aquamarines that enlarged or diminished at will. The apparition made me cry out, "Mephisto!" And so, yes, in this world where we were so bored, we get to meet almost an archaic Goethean symbol brought forward into our... We get to meet the devil. We were so bored, and what else to alleviate one's boredom than meeting the devil himself? And yet, in this act of usurpation of perhaps the real, or the real of the symbols, or the real of a sort of dated symbolism, Ghelderode playfully negates this. And here is, in my reading of this, here is a cheap devil who is retired to just be a magician, covered in seemingly kind of a tacky scarlet and wearing a ridiculous moustache and goatee. And so the mystery is alleviated in a way, whilst retaining the mystery, but also while still holding us within that sort of grey swamp of London. And Ghelderode does this consistently, each tale containing a unique take on these notions of spells. So to go through them, some more deeply than others. So the devil in London, we meet the devil in this sort of tacky way. The sick garden, we enter into the house, but the sickness is so much that actually that we want to get away from the mystery, I would argue. But the opening story, which is one of the masterful stories, the public scribe, where once again there's a loner, there is a lot of solitude with the protagonist, stumbles across and gains access to this sort of peculiar private museum tucked away, and develops and stumbles upon a waxwork mannequin who writes letters and poems, a sort of Lagottian-possessed automaton. That's where we find the spell. But our protagonist develops a connection in this sort of far off, in my mind, a sort of sordid rural France with this waxwork mannequin sat in what seems to be something akin to a confessional. But what's really haunting about this story is that this automaton that has been brought to life by whatever spell at a literary time where such symbols did exist, has not died when such romanticism and such surrealism maybe went away. Not surrealism, but magical thinking went away. This symbol has been left to its own devices to sort of not decay, but to still exist. But it's had its own life while we were away. And what we find is just a rather horrible feeling. But there's nothing threatening about it, and yet we feel a little threatened. And so as we go through, this won't be all the stories, but Rota Moga, with the protagonist playing with a bottle imp. The narrator releases a demon who can foretell the future. But that sort of strange, pact-like mystery ends up sort of with an ambiguous ending and doesn't really seem to go anywhere. And yet we're left with the possibility of these very potent symbols that could lead us somewhere. But the unnerving, uncanny atmosphere that Ghelderode allows us really doesn't allow these symbols to have their usual effect. Stealing from death, a man escapes death when he happens to trick death, and it's told from a fairly interesting point of view, and that one I actually have a reading from. And this is from Stealing from Death. Death comes like a thief, thundered the priest in the school chapel where like sinners we assembled in the evening. And we lowered our brows. Freezing winds scraped the nape of our necks, and we were afraid of the chapel door opening, letting in someone invisible come to carry one of us off. That phrase has stayed forever etched in my flesh, as deep as in a tombstone. The burning dust and corroding rain of the days of my life have never been able to efface it. Yes, the priest told the truth. Death comes like a thief. Hypocritically, and for certain people, the liveliest and healthiest, he turns assassin and ambushes them, attacking and striking them down in the space of an instant. But poor, unheeding creatures that we are, we can barely spare the time to think about him, who thinks about us. And it's to us that he comes in his shameful way to steal this thing, life, that we treat like dirt, and which seems priceless to us when we're about to lose it. And so once again we see there that these folk tales, this folklorish, strange, uncanny world that's been left to its own devices, we don't even get to have the perspective that we would have perhaps liked of the symbols, of the folklore characters, death, the devil, whoever it might be that happens to appear, even the atmospheres of dread. This is, in that way, a collection of tales that is a folklore without the human. It's anti-anthropocentric. Humans are thrown into it, and the spirits and the angels and these mythical religious symbols that are treated with a strange realism are not for us. We happen to be within that world. And it's from that unnerving, uncanny, slightly threatening, yet almost luxurious atmosphere that draws us in really grows. And it's in that way that you have the mixture of rot, decay, degradation. These are the things that we dislike, but they are given a life unto themselves. Taken away from the human, they are no longer these negative traits, and we just intrude upon these happenings of the world. There is throughout it, there is a few threads that are literarily I've already mentioned with respect to the symbols and the lives of symbols, and a sort of playfulness around realism and anti-realism. But throughout it, I think really grounding it is a sense of European urbanism. That would be the physicality. A post-World War I fantastical imagery of a city that perhaps has been in reality bombed, and from that has become a mythological relic unto which the symbols themselves have also been bombed and have been destroyed and have been left behind by that world. And it's happening, and Ghelderode is having to deal with what happens to the culture and the mythology when that is bombed too. And so we are amidst what feels, these all feel very connected in that way, as if you turn from one street, you will happen across another one of the stories in the collection itself. And there's always a juxtaposition between life, death, decay, growth, or the automaton and the free will, the angel and the devil. But they're always uncanny because I think they keep the human, the protagonist and the narrator, at arm's length. But ultimately, what this collection of stories will do is make one feel entirely alone with the narrator, but not given an anchor, which is of their understanding, of a typical understanding. Uncanniness, being unnerved, suspicion, paranoia, an anti-human mythology, but with enough strange, oh so human elements of flesh and silliness, almost silliness, and richness. Things, you read this and you get a feeling of like deep red wines and chocolate and harp music, as if one has taken tales of folklore in all their beauty and childlike splendor and fable-like nature, and thrown a nuclear bomb into them and allowed whatever decayed, weird, mutant remnants to grow amidst the French countryside, or the quaint French life, it seems. These are the images that are in my mind. But if you wish to read something very, very weird, very, very strange, that will allow you to, when you finish one of the tales, to go out at maybe 1, 2 p.m. and feel as if you're being watched in your familiar rural pathways, then this is one for you. This is a truly fantastic collection of stories, and I shall say no more. But that is Spells by Michel de Ghelderode. That is Spells by Michel de Ghelderode, translated by George McLennan, published by Wakefield Press. Once again, big thank you to them. And for those of you that are interested in uncanny, weird, fantastical, peculiar fiction, give it a look. Thanks for listening.